Welcome to our third interview in the Designer Spotlight series. I'm Snow Blackwood, and I'm here today with interior architect Julie O'Dwyer. Hi, Julie.
Hi, Snow. So good to have me here with you today.
It's good to see you again. So, Julie, your degree
Yeah.
is in environmental psychology, and
I have a bachelor's in architecture with a minor in environmental psychology.
okay.
Yes. Yeah.
So, yeah, as you know, it was the psychology part that really drew me into wanting to talk more with you about the psychology behind design. And you live in Ashland, Oregon.
It's a little bit of paradise down here, yes.
That's nice. Yeah. Well, that's as we get into the talk, I want to know more about what's going on in Ashland right now.
Mhm.
And you're a mom
I am.
with two daughters. Is that?
I have two adult daughters, a 21-year-old who's at school at George Washington University in DC, and a 23-year-old who's living life to the fullest in New York City.
Oh, very cool. You must
Yeah.
feel very proud and accomplished to get through parenting through.
I I consider them my most successful project to date.
Ah,
So
yeah.
I'm hoping that they do well over time. But yeah, they're amazing young women, and they're a little far away. I miss the fact that they're on the other side of the country,
Yeah.
but I'm super proud of who they've become and where they're going with their lives.
Yeah, that's well put. Your best project, because
Yeah,
boy, I'm in the thick of it with my two boys, 10 and 13 years old.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Those are tough ages.
getting real.
Sorry, it's not going to be over for a little while. I hate to say it.
Oh man. So, Julie, I was remembering how we first connected,
Mhm.
and it was while I was at Oregon Home magazine. I was leafing through the issue
Oh, how
for our
fun.
meeting, and you had submitted a project for the Structure and Style Awards program. It
Right.
was the Man Cave, I
Yes.
believe.
Yes.
And also came across that and this ad that you had put in the magazine, which had this gorgeous photo of you. And
Oh, thank you.
it really brought me back to those times when I got to review cool design projects and connect with cool designers. And I really loved that. So thank you for being here today and letting me kind of relive this experience of getting to
Well,
connect with designers.
I'm just so impressed that you're doing all of these presentations and interviews, because I think one of the things that we as designers is we don't get to hear from each other as often as I think we should.
Mhm.
And our clients don't get to see us outside of that, and I hate to say it, that sort of salesman perspective. Like, we're real people, we have a history, we have something that we're bringing to the project, and that's going to affect how we do our work. And so for people to get to know us a little bit better, I think is really, really important. So thank you for providing that, both to the design community and to the community of our clients.
Oh, great. Well, it's great to hear that. I really appreciate that feedback. I'm hoping that it will grow and it will be kind of a resource
Yeah.
and very useful. So let's get right into our interview.
Yeah.
As I mentioned, I am really interested in the psychology behind design, and I'm wondering if you can share more about your degree in environmental psychology and kind of help us understand what that is and how does it affect how you work with your clients and do your design work.
Well, a little bit of background. I'm a second generation architect. My father was an architect, and I grew up in his studio. I think the first project I ever worked on, he actually hired me when I was probably 10 or 11 to help work on an elementary school, because he wanted somebody who would be in that space to have an input into what that project would look like. And most of his work was what I would refer to as institutional work. So schools, hospitals, prisons, state office buildings, those kind of things, where you didn't have a whole lot of user input. And this is back in the 70s. It was just beginning to sort of come into the realm of architecture of, like, how is a space used? How do people feel in a space? So I grew up with that. And so when I decided to go to architecture school, I really looked for a program that could connect me to the people that are going to use the space. And not only how can I affect them, but how do they affect their space?
Mhm.
And how do I help support that? And so I got my degree at the University of Arizona, and they had a professor there who was doing environmental psychology, really from the perspective of the built environment. Um, at that time, a lot of the research that was being done was around institutional type spaces. So again, a lot of work with, unfortunately, jails and prisons and
Mhm.
those kind of spaces. But it started to create this wealth of information about how small changes in an environment can affect a person in a really extreme way.
Mhm.
Um, and so I took that into my architecture practice, and a lot of the work that I did when I was doing sort of larger built environments, more corporate work, was sort of moved into what I refer to as change architecture. So I worked with a lot of clients who their businesses or their companies were going through a huge change in how they were structured, what their priorities were, where they wanted to grow. And so how could the built environment support those new missions? And how could that space impact what the mission was going to be? So we did a lot of work with large Fortune 500 companies who were trying to get away from those very private office spaces and move to more open office spaces, really introducing collaborative space, incidental interaction space, all of that kind of stuff. So again, how does a space affect how a person works and lives in going forward? And then about 16 years ago, and this is where it pulls into being a mom, I became a mom of two young girls and realized that I couldn't continue to work in those sort of large cities and on those large projects and raise my children at the same time.
Mhm.
So I found this sweet little town in Southern Oregon and moved here to create a life for myself. And there wasn't a whole lot of corporate architecture. And so I moved more into residential. And that's where I've been sort of for the last 15 or 16 years.
Mhm.
But I take all of that with me when I go and meet a client, because their home is a place where they're going to spend a lot of time. It's been interesting in the last year and a half with COVID, how much more important that is for people. And I think it's going to continue to be that way. I mean, my perspective is that even if we go back to a place where we can get together and work in an office space, people have learned there's real benefit to being able to have a space at home where they can work,
Mhm.
and that's supportive of that. So I think we're going to see an interesting mix of what happens.
Mhm.
But so I bring that whole idea of how does space affect people and how do people affect space
Mhm.
into this practice that I do now.
Mhm. That's great. Yeah, and I think that it's a simple concept, but it's so really so complex. Like
Mhm.
that
It
it
is.
yeah.
It is. And I think part of it is, I think so often we as designers are taught
Mhm.
to approach a project, and designers, and I both mean both interior designers and architects, with this sort of perspective of we are going to create something for someone, we're going to make this for them. But I think if you flip it on the other side and look from the other side of the perspective, is how do these people then affect their space, and how
Mhm.
do we support them in affecting their space in a
Mhm.
way that makes them feel more whole and more like it's for them. So
Right. Yeah, so that kind of gets into my next question is, that a lot of times people can't or they won't say what they really like or what they really want. So how do you, really kind of draw that out in clients and really kind of tap into what their inner worlds are and
yeah. When I first meet clients, which is when it kind of all starts, is that first of all, they're not hiring me to get a Julie O space. What my personal design preferences are is not what I'm going to give them. I'm going to give them what I think is the best representation of what they want, and that has the most clear and concise understanding of what they would feel comfortable with. So sometimes that aligns with my own personal taste, sometimes it doesn't. Um, so what I have to do is figure out what it is that is their thing. What do they see in their head as being the ultimate space for them? And so that's part of it is a conversation about examples of other spaces that they feel comfortable in, that they felt excited in, that they felt at home in. Sometimes I'll even ask them about trips that they've been on, and places that they've been, like where, and part of it is not only what they say, but how their whole body reacts to it. So
Mm-hmm.
like when they get animated about something, it's like they're excited, even if they're not saying that with words. The other thing I was just thinking the other day, because I had a client who is brand new, and we were walking through their house for the first time. It's a couple that have met later in life, and they're joining together in a home, and he wants her to feel comfortable in his home. And so they want to do some shifts, but he's got a history, and so he wants to have part of himself in that space. And so as we're walking through the space, and he's like, no, whatever she doesn't want, we can get rid of, which I'm hearing those words.
Mm-hmm.
But then as we're walking through the space, I'm hearing him, he's just sort of like subtly like rubbing certain chairs,
Mm-hmm.
or like longingly looking at this one painting. And I'm like, those things mean something to him. Like, and so we need to make sure that, yes, we're going to make some changes and she's going to feel more comfortable, but there's some parts that he's really attached to, even if he's not saying that. And so what I bring out in him is like, can you tell me why that painting seems to mean something to you?
Mm-hmm.
And just in that process of him saying that to me in front of her, she's like, well, we need to keep that, like that's important. And so part of what I try and do is have those kind of conversations where it's the words, it's the references, but it's also a lot about like the physical reaction, because that's how they're going to be in the space long term. They're physically going to be in that space. So I
Right.
want them to react
Very intuitive.
positively.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And really kind of pay attention to body language and energy. And that kind of leads to the next question about couples and, how you work with them. It's, because I'm sure that they can be difficult and not agree on the same things. I know firsthand.
Yeah.
And you already kind of gave a great answer there about, letting them talk it out through that process. And then she saw how valuable that was to him also. Are there other like techniques that you have or?
Well, there's definitely is kind of some typical questions that I'll ask a couple. And part of it's in my interview process with them, because I want to be the best that I can for them, but I also really need to understand what that means for them. So one of the main questions I always ask is like, who's the decision maker? Like ultimately, if he says blue and she says red, who gets to decide? Or do we get to go to purple? Like, let's just be really clear about that.
Mhm.
And sometimes I test that. Like if I don't get a clear answer, or if I get a sort of passive aggressive, oh no, really, she could decide if she really, really, like, wait a minute, that's not a clear answer.
Mhm.
And part of what I try and do is also give them some examples of decisions that are going to need to be made and hear how they respond to them.
Mhm.
Um, and sometimes it's about, especially when they're trying to share responsibility. Like I love it when a client's really clear about this is who's going to make the decision. They are the key contact.
Yeah.
That's where you're going to go. Like, great, I'm moving forward. Awesome.
Mhm.
But sometimes they just haven't been through that process. And so they're not sure, and so sometimes I ask them like, okay, well, especially if it's a full house, like, is there a certain room that like, it just has to be that one person's space? And then, so they're really going to control that. And then maybe there's another room that's for the other person. And then somewhere in between there, we're going to have compromise. So part of it is making sure that's really clear. But I also, like I had this one project where, she was clearly the decision maker and he was totally fine with it. Like, that's like, whatever, I'm not interested in this part of the project. But there was one little thing he had mentioned about, there was this chair that he had in the dining room that had, I don't know, some plaque of his father or something. I can't remember. It was, some family memento.
Mhm.
And it just didn't work in any space. And she was like, it's not that important to him. We can get rid of it. And I said, you know what? But I think if we had this one thing that he loved, he'd be so much more happy about everything else that he didn't really have a decision in.
Mm.
And so we found a spot for this chair, and you could tell when he walked in the room and he scanned it. It was like when it landed on that chair, it was just like his whole body relaxed. Like he didn't care about anything else. He was just like, oh, that's for me, you know?
Mm.
So I think that's also part of what's really important, especially when you're working with a couple, you
Yeah,
know, that they each have that thing that feels like, oh, that's
I
part
would
of.
imagine and that you're so helpful to couples too, to have an
Well,
outside person.
I will also say that I've only fired 2 clients in my entire career, and they both have been, my response to them was, you need a marriage counselor. Um,
Yeah,
and
I can
I'm
imagine
not
it
it.
goes into that sometimes. Yeah,
So,
relationships. So my next question is, in this age of digital design, you still do hand-drawn
I
design.
do. I do. Um, a lot of that comes from my architectural background. Again, I was raised in this profession from a very early age, so way before there was computer renderings. So I learned that. But also in studying psychology, there's this really strong connection to how a brain connects to things by a manual application. So for writers, writers sometimes want to write things out versus just typing them up because it gets into their head a little bit better. Students, when they're taking notes, a lot of times people will say that, you know, you need to write it out. Even if you never look at it again, just write it out. Journaling is another example of that.
Mhm.
And so for architecture, for me, like to get into the space, I need to physically draw it. So
Mhm.
that's one aspect. That's for my own personal like way I process. But the other thing that I've noticed with clients, and this is especially when it gets to residential, I think corporate and public work, high-end resolution rendering is much more effective in communicating. But when we're talking about someone's home, if it's so realistic, then when they get there, it's a disappointment.
Mhm.
It doesn't quite ever look like that because it is not a stage set, you know, it's got the messiness or the reality of life. And so if I can bring them to that level in a hand-drawn perspective where it opens their imagination,
Mhm.
but where that imagination goes can be very flexible, then when they get to the final result, it really does soak in. It's like, oh yeah, like I knew that that was going to be a white wall, or, you know, like behind me, it's like, I knew there was going to be this cool Moroccan fence thing, but oh wow, now I really get to absorb what that is. But if it was a slightly different one than this one, you know, in the rendering, they'd be like, oh, it just doesn't look quite right, you know? So to me, that's important, is that we are able to communicate in a way that continues to allow the client to kind of be expansive in their imagination, so that they engage in it a little bit more. And they're not so worried about like, oh, I just didn't like that exact yellow. It's like,
Mhm.
okay, you know,
I
so
love that. Yeah, that makes so much sense to me. And part of my process too, as a graphic designer, I remember in school, the teacher would make us do like 100 sketches of a logo
yeah,
before, you know,
yeah,
actually coming with up with a good one. And it mattered, you know, doing
yeah,
that hand-drawn work and putting in that time makes a huge difference in the
yeah,
result.
yeah, yeah.
So, could you talk a bit about maintaining mental and emotional fluidity in your design?
That was one of the most interesting questions that you proposed to me from before. So to me, it's about that spaces aren't static. They're not static in the design process,
Hmm.
and they're definitely not static after I get done, you know, whatever that is. And so it's really important that the clients understand that and that I communicate that with them. A good example is I do a lot of art placement and art curation on my projects, primarily because I have a lot of friends who are artists, and I really like love to share local artists with my clients.
Hmm.
And um, so often clients are like, okay, well, can we just like pick everything and put it all up, you know? And I'm like, actually, I think there needs to be a slow evolving of what that is, and it needs to unfold for you, because you're going to put a major piece on a wall, and that's going to make you think about the whole space a little differently. And so then maybe over on this wall, you're going to want some, like, you need to allow it to kind of unfold and for you to be able to process that over time. The other thing that I really work really hard at is that people need to love what is in their space. Like I have really high-end, successful clients who've lived their entire lives and, you know, they're having their ultimate home. But I also have a lot of clients who are like just starting out and they're trying to, you know, like they're scraping together the money to make it work. And what I tell those people who are starting out, as well as people, you know, who've been in life a lot, is like, get it because you love it. Like if you don't love it, don't spend any money on it and know that it's going to go away. Like, don't put a whole lot of money into something that you don't actually really, really love. And if you do love it, then figure out how to like make that part of your life, even if it takes a little bit longer, because you need your space, your home, everything around you to really speak to you. And so if it doesn't love you and you don't love it, and it's kind of like the Maria Kondo kind of thing. It's like, does it talk to me? Does it say something to me? And so I think that's really important.
Attachment to things.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that a lot of people struggle with, you know, hanging art and choosing art. And actually, when I was leafing through the Oregon Home magazine, I was remembering an article we did about how to do that, you know, and to take off some of the pressure of, you know, putting so much on the piece that you choose, and being, you know, being free to just put up what you like and put things that maybe don't perfectly match together, you know, to do like a gallery wall. And
yeah, I do a lot of gallery walls. I wish I could walk the camera around my house right now, but because I love art. I'm a huge fan of artists.
Me too.
And so I do a lot of collecting, and kind of every once in a while I'll just be like, take everything off the walls, put it down on the floor, and then rehang it some other way, you know, just because like it gives it new life, you know. It's like,
I do that probably every 3 months in my
yeah,
place.
like, oh, those two pieces look kind of neat together, and now they look different when I put them apart, and you know, whatever it might
Yeah,
be.
or I'm tired of looking at something, I put it away for a while and then bring it back out later.
Yeah.
So, from what I know, designing home remodels is often a collaborative, sometimes contentious effort between the architect, the interior designer, and the builder. How do you handle the relationship with the architects and the builders?
Um, I think I'm privileged in that right now in my life, because I've been in this business so long
Mhm.
that my experience speaks for itself. I also think that I have a bit of an advantage because I come from an architectural background. So I not only have that credential, but I have that language that architects can understand. I also really think that I work with people as a team. And so my goal is for all of us to walk away from the project feeling really proud of what we did, feeling like everyone understood each other, and never wanting to throw anyone under the bus. You know, builders do something that I can't do. And architects do something that I can't necessarily do. But how do we support each other to do what we do in the best possible way, I think is really important. And part of that is like that whole, like, I remember I had a project where we had this difficult issue with some millwork, and the general contractor, sort of the project head, kept saying, can you just do a sketch for the cabinet guy? Can you just do a sketch? And I'm like, can I just go talk to him? Because like, I need him to understand what my intention is. He actually knows how the best way to put that together. But if he can understand what my intention is,
Right.
then we're going to have a better solution. And so we did. And he was like, oh, how about if we do X, Y, and Z? And I'm like, yeah, that will work for it. So in some ways, I think part of it is like allowing that expertise to shine, you know, I think is really important. So it's, to me, my goal is like, I've got the vision. I have a lot of the resources. I have the collaborative, you know, coordination, but I'm not the one who's actually taking a hammer or a nail gun or a paintbrush or, you know, a table saw to the project. And so if they know how to do that better, great, let me give you that.
So you leave a little bit of flexibility and you
Absolutely.
allow for the conversation to happen rather than just handing them a drawing.
And at the same time, I think I try and push them a little bit. Southern Oregon is not known for its innovative design, although we have some amazing, amazing interior designers and architects who are doing some really cool stuff, but we don't have a long history of that.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of times, I mean, I travel all over the West Coast going to shows and seeing projects and stuff like that. So a lot of times it is like, here, let me push you a little bit. Like, let's try and do this, even though you haven't done it before,
Mm-hmm.
so that the next time we can do it even better. So part of my job is also like, let's bring some new things into this environment that we have.
Yeah. So do most clients come to you first, or do they come via architects and design builders?
Um, I would say most come to me, but it's not necessarily always first. They might come at the same time. Um, all of my projects are collaborative, so almost right away, one of the first questions I'll ask, if I haven't been brought in by a builder or an architect, the first question I'll ask the client is like, who do you have an architect? Do you have a builder? Who are they? If you don't have them, let's get them in here. Let's get them as part of that process.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, it's really important that that team gets pulled together as quickly as possible,
Yeah.
because we're all going to be working on this together and we need to figure out how we work together. Again, I feel really privileged that I've been in this business in this area for so long that I think I've worked with every single builder that's out there. And for the most part, I feel like they all like me. So that's really good.
Great in a small town. You need to keep that reputation.
Yeah. And it's, but I do love it when a builder brings me in, because it makes me recognize that they value me, and that's really important. For them to value me from the get-go is really phenomenal. And especially, like, I just started working with this one builder, who I've known for years since I moved here, but they did much more like housing developments.
Mm-hmm.
So there wasn't a specific client set up yet, so it was just sort of a bunch of houses that would then be sold to people. So there wasn't really a place for me to get engaged. But unfortunately, we've had this, as I mentioned to you before, we've had this major wildfire down here last fall.
Right. Yeah.
And so a lot of builders who were doing one kind of housing building might be doing something different, just because everybody needs to be building right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so that contractor has gone into building sort of, specific one at a time homes for an individual client. And they brought me into a project, and it went so well that, like, literally right before I got on this call with you, he's like, hey, so, like, what's your schedule like? And can I send you some more people? And I was like, that's the hugest compliment you could give me, that it went so well that you actually want to bring me in before, you start digging in the dirt.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
So do you have a favorite type of client? And if so, could you describe them?
Um, I would say my favorite clients end up being my friends. But I don't necessarily know, they don't necessarily start off as my friends, but like we end up becoming friends. So I always like clients who I know I feel like an affinity towards on a personal level. But also it's really about, usually they are or have been a high level specialized professional in their field.
Mm-hmm.
And what I take from that is that there's value to their knowledge and their experience, and they transpose that onto me and be like, she's valuable for her knowledge and her experience. And so they will trust that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's people who I think haven't had that experience of having to explain why they personally are valued.
Mm-hmm.
It's harder for me to sometimes get them over that hump of like, trust me, that
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Mm.
so it's, it tends to be doctors and lawyers and engineers, people who've like they've really focused on something, and like, we know this really, really well, and we know we don't know the rest of this. So you're going to be in this part of that part that we don't know.
Yeah, it's easier for you to just get respect and be able to do what you need to do and not
Exactly.
so much.
Yeah.
So my final question is around the wildfires that happened and this last summer. And from what it sounds like, they really, really did some work in Ashland, Oregon and the surrounding areas. And I was just curious if you could share with us how that's affected your work. What I'm really curious about is if you've had any clients who have lost their homes and had you come in to, do a new space for them, and if they wanted what they had before or if they wanted something
Yeah.
totally different.
Um, so the Alameda and Oberchain fires that affected the Rogue Valley last September, they started in Ashland, but the mass amount of devastation happened in the towns of Phoenix and Talent. There were a lot of single family homes that were destroyed, but a vast majority were manufactured homes that were really the sole source of low income housing here in the valley for the workforce, for undocumented workers, as well as the elderly and veterans. And so that's been tragic for our community, to say the least. And I get a little emotional because it's really hard. And we were already in a housing shortage here in the valley. So there are people who have had their single family homes, who sort of have their life together enough and they had enough insurance and they've been able to like get their lot cleared and get a contractor in there. That is a very small percentage, very, very small percentage. I have not been working with any of those people yet. And most of them are literally building back exactly what they had before. A lot of them, the homes were probably less than 10 years old. And so they're trying to just get back to kind of what they had.
Right.
For me, what is exciting about this opportunity, because I do always kind of want to look for like, where can we go with this, even though there's devastation, is the opportunity for us as a community to shift the economic equity around housing in this valley. So I'm working with a bunch of organizations and groups that are developing around how do we develop different housing types here in the valley that shift equity away from the renter or the landowner to the community. So things like housing co-ops, land trusts, co-housing, cottage villages, all of that kind of stuff is really in the works. We aren't going to see a whole lot of that really come to fruition, probably at least for another 18 months. We have some great work that's being done by the county to clear sites as quickly as possible just to get FEMA housing on there so that we can have temporary housing. I think we have 800 families that are living in hotels right now. So it's pretty drastic, to say the least. But I think when we start looking at 2021 to me is going to be the year where we're just going to try and get everyone with a roof over their head that's theirs and like a little bit more stable. I think 2022 is when we're going to start to see the ability for us to really kind of shift where housing is in this valley. And I'm amazingly impressed with the support we've received, not only from the different jurisdictions, which have had to learn how to work together, from the county, from the state, from the Fed, everyone from FEMA to Fannie Mae to our state representatives and our federal representatives, as well as like the philanthropic organizations that are out there. They really are focused on trying to make something different here in the recovery. So I'm honored that I get to be part of that right now. So I wish I could say that I have something about a specific client, but right now I don't. But I'm really excited that people are trying to make this into something that's better than what it was versus just replacing it with stuff that wasn't really serving people to the best of its ability.
Yeah. Well, thank you for talking about that. I'm sure it is emotional. And I drove through the Willamette Forest a while back and got to see some of the burn.
Hmm.
And yeah, it was hard to look at. It's very depressing, but great to hear, the positive sides to this and how it will get better.
Yeah. And I also think that it's really important that we as designers and people in the built environment industry, that we start to create these alliances, because we're not the first community that's been affected by this kind of wildfire. And the saddest thing is we're not going to be the last.
Hmm.
And so the lessons that we're learning, we're actually tapping into. We've had lots and lots of conversations with the folks in Paradise, California, and in Santa Rosa and Santa Cruz. And we're hoping to share that with wherever this goes next,
Hmm.
because it's really important that these communities can start to learn from each other, because it is so catastrophic.
Yeah.
Um, and you can't do it by yourself. You need to reach out and have other people
Sure.
help you.
Yeah, a lot of people
Yeah.
involved.
Yeah.
Well, Julie, again, thank you so much
Oh, thank you
for
so much for
making
doing this.
time. For those of you out there, designers like Julie, they don't get paid for this. It's just completely generous donation. So I really, really appreciate it. And I
Well,
really,
and thank you for doing everything you're doing to promote this and to share my story with other people. Like, I can't thank you enough. I'm hoping that one day I get to come up and see you in real life, and
yeah, that would
we'll
be
have coffee or a glass of wine or something.
yes. Let's do. I hope so soon. And I'd love to come down to Ashland. I haven't been there in years, and it's
I'll give you a tour anytime you want.
yeah,
You might not ever go home, but that's okay.
yeah, that's fine. I feel like running away sometimes. So I hope everybody out there enjoyed this as well. And I hope you have a great weekend.
Thanks.